Hello everyone, welcome to today's CHRA webinar, How to Ready Your Organization for the Trudeau Investment in Infrastructure. I'm Kristen Holinsky, Program Manager here at CHRA, and I'll be your facilitator for today's webinar. Before we begin, I'll give a brief overview of the webinar technology we'll be using today. I'll then introduce our agenda and speakers for this afternoon's presentation. This webinar is taking place in real time. You should now be able to see a title screen of today's presentation and be able to hear me via your computer speakers, headset, or through your telephone if you've chosen to dial in. I want to let you know that you are all muted, and we do this to minimize background noise. If you wish, you may also ask questions throughout the webinar today, and we encourage you to do this. You may do this by typing your questions into the dialog box on the webinar control panel at any time during the presentation. We'll address as many questions as we can during the Q&A portion of the presentation at the end of the webinar after both our speakers have presented. And please indicate, if appropriate, to which speaker your question is being addressed. Moving on to the agenda for today's webinar, we're joined today by Don McBain, Executive Director of Ontario Aboriginal Housing Services, and Kevin Albers, Chief Executive Officer of Macola Group of Societies in BC. Thank you both for being here with us today. Don and Kevin will speak on the current political climate in relation to federal re-engagement on the social infrastructure file under the new Trudeau government. Don McBain will take an overarching political view of what renewed investment could mean for affordable housing providers, particularly those serving Aboriginal population. Kevin Albers will then speak to strategies around organizational readiness and sector capacity building in context to leveraging equity, partnerships, development opportunities, land assets, and more. But before we move on to today's presentation, I would like to invite a special guest, Louise Atkins, CHRA Aboriginal Caucus Coordinator, to provide you with the welcome.
Thank you, Kristen. I am pleased to bring greetings on behalf of Robert Byers, who is the CHRA Director of Aboriginal Communities. Welcome everyone to today's CHRA webinar, and I want to take this opportunity to highlight the work that CHRA is undertaking on Aboriginal housing as we work towards solutions to retain existing social and affordable housing, as well as innovations in management, social enterprise, finance, and community building in order to expand affordable housing. I invite you to join us in Montreal on April 12, 2016 for Aboriginal Caucus Day as part of CHRA's annual Congress. This third annual full-day Aboriginal Caucus event will build on the conversations that will take place today, and they'll also look at tapping into financing opportunities as well as inspiring partnerships that increase Aboriginal housing options. Caucus Day registration is now open, and similar to last year, we are expecting at least 100 participants. I am also very pleased to announce that the highlights report of Aboriginal Caucus Day 2015 is now posted online with photographs, summaries of presentations and discussions, and plenty of direct quotes from the 103 participants. Just go to the CHRA website and click on the tab for Programs, Aboriginal Caucus. Today's webinar will focus on how to ready your organization for the new federal government's investment in social infrastructure. I would also like to note that with us on the webinar today are Aboriginal-led and Aboriginal-serving organizations from coast to coast. I would also like to welcome municipalities, nonprofit housing and service providers, and private sector individuals. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, Louise, for that introduction. And without further ado, I would now like to welcome our first presenter, who's Don McBain, Executive Director of Ontario Aboriginal Housing Services. Don carries with him a lifetime of experience from a career spent serving Aboriginal organizations. Over his career, Don's been called upon by provincial housing ministries from across Canada and Aboriginal housing providers alike to consult and share his expertise and knowledge in bringing about real and sustainable changes to the control and administration of Aboriginal housing in Canada. So over to you, Don.
Thanks very much, Kristen, and also thank you very much, Louise. Ani, everyone, it's nice to speak to individuals and organizations from coast to coast. When asked by CHRA to come up with a webinar idea, Kevin and I thought that, talking about where we are right now and where we have been, where we know we are, and some of the promises that have been made, prior to the federal budget that we're anticipating the 3rd or 4th week of March might be a really good place to start. So I've been given the responsibility of basically discussing the current national situation and what the situation we find ourselves in right now based on the immediate past and some of the things that have happened. In October, we were all with bated breath waiting for this election to happen. And the 2015 election platform by our current government outlined a few things that I've indicated here. The government indicated that it would renew federal leadership in housing, starting with a new 10-year investment in investment social infrastructure. They also indicated or promised that they will prioritize investments in affordable housing and seniors facilities, build even more housing units, refurbish old ones, give support to municipalities to maintain rent-guaranteed income subsidies. They specified in the co-op sector, but we're hoping that that includes all sectors, and give communities the money they need for First Nations initiatives. So that should help out all of our organizations that focus on the Indigenous community. They also wanted to encourage the construction of new rental housing by removing all GST on new capital investments in affordable housing. That would probably make life a lot easier for a lot of nonprofits that have to wait for their GST/HST dollars to flow back to them when they're trying to fund large investment in capital infrastructure in social housing developments. And there's also a promise to direct Canada Mortgage and Housing to create a new infrastructure bank to provide financing to support new construction in affordable housing. We all know that even though we have some capital programs now, very often we need to have additional capital funding to support those capital programs. Something near and dear to my heart, too, they also promised that they would conduct an inventory of all available federal lands and buildings that could be repurposed for types of housing development. And I hope with the federal government taking a lead in this, and I hope they take it quite seriously, hopefully we'll be able to talk provinces into doing the same thing. Because there's a lot of unused properties out there that are within service lines that housing development doesn't get priority at being able to develop. So with the new election, based on those platform promises, we ended up with a bunch of new key players. Obviously, a new Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, who was responsible for making the majority of those promises. Bill Morneau, who's the Minister of Finance, who is going to be responsible for developing the numbers that they're going to reinvest in infrastructure. Mr. Duclos, that should be an L, not an I there. Mr. Duclos, Minister of Families, Children and Social Developments, is been given the responsibility of CMHC. In a lot of the conversations lately, CMHC's name has come up again. The President, Evan Siddell, will obviously be very engaged in a lot of work that's being done. In a lot of the pre-budget consultations that I've been listening in on, the Infrastructure Minister, the next Minister of Infrastructure and Communities, Amarjeet Sohai, has indicated that a lot of the infrastructure dollars may go directly to large municipalities as well as provinces. The CMHC conversation, though, always seems to be included in all of their discussions. To the benefit of the Indigenous community, we have Dr. Carolyn Bennett, who has been appointed the Minister of Aboriginal, actually Indigenous Affairs. Carolyn Bennett has been the literal opposition critic in the Housing and Indigenous Affairs portfolio for a long time, and fortunately for us in Ontario, her being from Ontario, we're quite familiar with Dr. Bennett's position. And another name I put on there is Adam Vaughan. He's the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister. He's been a huge social, affordable, co-op housing champion in the past in the province of Ontario, and I think Adam really gets it and understands the current position that we find ourselves in. So those are some of the new key players in the federal Liberal government. Obviously, the existing facts, as we all know, I mean, this is rehashing things that we've been talking about over the last 3 or 4 years, is that the social housing agreement and the operating agreements that fund that are going to start expiring in a really big way, in a very material way, in 2018. Community housing is underserviced right now, and we've always known that there's a requirement to sort of catch up with rest of community when nationally and in the majority of the provinces, the Indigenous population represents over 4% of the overall population, while there's only 1% of social housing that's directed to the Indigenous population. So those are just facts that we've been dealing with for the last quite a number of years. These are, basically these are the implications that we've been talking about with end of operating agreements for quite a while. Providing quality living experiences with any consistency is very difficult given the end of operating agreements. All of the things that are outlined there with a lack of administrative funding that's provided as a benefit from those operating agreements are going to create issues. And this is all post-subsidy implications that we're going to have. Providing long-term planning across a portfolio for financing and repairs and maintenance is going to be a real large one. And dealing with asset management without those subsidy agreements for the majority of the portfolio providers will be very difficult. And then what we have is the outcomes, basically the results. What we've seen in Ontario anyway is that with the expiry of the agreements, these are the likely outcomes. Either the RGI calculated units end up going towards a market rent that basically makes your client group not being able to afford the rents that are charged. But even more seriously, what we've been seeing with the original expiring agreements is selling them out of the program and using that capital to fund other operations. So there's a very good possibility that, given the current circumstances, the 19,000 units that are available across Canada, we could lose a very large number of those just to selling through the open market. What we know right now, we know that the 2013 action plan, the federal government, the former federal government, put in $253 million beginning in April 2014 to extend the investment in affordable housing program. Provinces and territories were given the responsibility and the flexibility of designing those programs. And fortunately for us here in Ontario, we were able to design an Aboriginal specific rental home ownership and repair program. And we were able to negotiate 5% of the capital dollars that were cost shared between the province and the federal government to operate within that investment in affordable housing. And what we've been able to manage to do is, from the 2012 to 2015 period, we've managed to build an additional 114 units, and in the 14-20, our target's another 137. With the dollars that were made available through the off-reserve Aboriginal Trust, that adds another 300 or so units. So the successes that we've known out of this economic action plan, as well as the off-reserve Aboriginal Trust, will easily be outweighed by the loss of probably 2,500 units in the province of Ontario if there is no federal re-engagement in the existing nonprofit portfolio. Just a blurb there about the 2015 federal budget that was outlined by the Conservative government. All of that being said, the only thing that really means anything is the last line, and the last line indicates that there's no new funding, there was no new initiatives, and it was just a regurgitation of dollars that they'd already put into the program. So basically, I don't know how many people were involved in pre-budget discussions with the federal government. Post election day, there was a lot of organizational requests to the new government about what we wanted. So this ask is pretty much reflective of what the Canadian Housing Renewal Association, communicated to the new ministers and to the Prime Minister, as well as Housing Partnership Canada was basically along the same. So there was a request to reinvest in the existing social housing stock. That includes the $19,000 that are specific to the Indigenous community across the country. A more specific ask from our organization was for upwards of $6,000 per unit per year to ensure that we could maintain our existing portfolios, given the client group that we currently have, which is deep core. We currently only charge 25% RGI in our portfolio, and it would require an ongoing investment of about that to be able to maintain those units. We also asked to construct an additional 100,000 homes over their 10-year planning cycle. So, you know, we have to reduce core housing need to address the homeless situation that we currently have. And we've also asked for community transformation and innovation assistance as well. So that was the specific kind of ask from the new federal government. So the Prime Minister, after he selected his cabinets, basically provides each individual minister with mandate letters. In those mandate letters, he describes what he wants that particular minister and his ministry to do to meet the outcomes of the promises that were made during their campaign. So Mr. Duclos, the Minister of Families, Children, Social Development, who is also responsible for CMHC, these are a few of the bullet points that were outlined in his mandate letter. And it was prioritizing infrastructure investments in affordable housing, construction of new and refurbishing of existing units, working with the Minister of Finance to encourage new construction by removing all GST/HST on new capital investments, and working with the Minister of Finance to ensure that new Infrastructure Bank of Canada that will help us finance new projects. The letter to Dr. Carolyn Bennett, Minister for Indigenous and Northern Affairs, was to work in collaboration with the Minister of Infrastructures in consultation with First Nations, Inuit, and other stakeholders to improve essential physical infrastructure for Indigenous communities, including improving housing outcomes for Indigenous people. And then finally, Mr. Amarjeet Sohi, Minister of Infrastructures and Communities, was to develop a 10-year plan to deliver significant new funding to the provinces, territories, and municipalities for social infrastructure, including affordable housing. And that's been a big priority in the discussion, is that now in every conversation that the Liberal government has about infrastructure, affordable housing is always included in that. And included in that mandate letter was creating a housing strategy to reestablish the federal government roles in supporting affordable housing. So, you know, we looked at that as the government reintroduction into the funding of the existing housing stock. And again, he talks about this development of a Canadian infrastructure bank as well. So that was predominantly the ask. That was sort of the support of the ask that we had from all the from the Prime Minister's letters to all the ministers. So, given that we know all that and we understand where we are, the budget that's going to come out in March, we hope will provide both short and long-term directions on what they're going to do with the amount of new infrastructure money that they've already discussed putting out there to help economic stimulation in the country. What we really don't want them to do, and in my discussions with the parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Finance, Mr. Champagne, I made it very clear that although we want to develop a 10-year plan, if we want to really stimulate the current economic situation in the country, rolling out a lot of those infrastructure dollars very quickly will really help establish the very real indication that the housing sector is now capable and has the ability to deliver on those economic development promises. So from here, Mr. Albers, Kevin's going to take you through what you should, or how you should position your organizations to take advantage, hopefully, of these new capital dollars that are going to be released.
So thanks, Don. I haven't been called Mr. Albers in a few weeks, so I appreciate that. I want to start by thanking Kristen, Louise, and also Robert Byers for the introduction, and thanks CHRA for this opportunity. I'm waiting for Kristen to switch the screen over. I think you're still all looking at Don's screen. There we go. So, sorry, people, just a little technical thing here. I also want to welcome everybody and encourage everybody to attend this year's CHRA conference as well again. Looking forward to seeing everybody there, and especially on the Aboriginal Caucus Day, which is April the 12th. So as Don had mentioned, he sort of set the stage at a very high level, federal kind of landscape perspective. And what I'm trying to do at the second half of this presentation is to drill down a little bit deeper and try to bring it down to the organizational level. And I'll be touching on a couple of things, maybe provincially, that kind of thing, but I'm really trying to take that step or that direction from an organizational level. So I'm going to start with speaking to the issues of organizational readiness, organizational capacity, the transformation in the sector, the affordable and social housing sector in Canada, what the project needs to look like, and what the value proposition will be, and the promotion of your project, which is very important to obviously get it to a place of funding and success. So when I speak about organizational readiness, I'm thinking of the typical nonprofit Aboriginal housing provider, social housing provider. And when I think of ensuring that you're ready to respond to these kinds of opportunities once they do actually occur, you need to be in good standing with all levels of government, any regulation providers, so the municipalities, the province, the ministries of housing and social welfare, children, family development, all those things. We really want to make sure that we're in good standing with them all. The registrar of companies, the registrar for your societies, your nonprofit status, your charitable status as registered through Canada Revenue Agency as well. I want to make sure that all those things are in good order. Obviously in a good place with your funders, not just from a place that you're meeting the requirements, but you're also in the know for them, that they have a good connection to your organization, you have a good connection back to them, and there's somebody that they would reach out to your organization when they were looking to make an investment. So then I'm going to break it down into the team and making sure that your team is ready for this type of adventure. It's a long process, it's a difficult process, and it really needs buy-in from the entire organization to ensure its success. So first of all, right, starting at the very top of your organization, the board of directors needs to be committed to this type of process, to this type of investment, and to understanding what it's going to take for your organization to be successful. So the staff as well, obviously the staff are probably the people that are going to make this project come to life and bring it forward to the boards and to the funders. So we want to make sure that the staff is on side, is understanding of what it is that we're trying to accomplish, why we're trying to accomplish it. Always important to have good consultants and subject matter experts in areas that you don't have. I'm not saying that you should have them on a retainer, but I think you should have a bit of a stable of go-to people, go-to organizations that you can pick up the phone or send an email and reach out and get advice and direction from them where you may need it from time to time. It's just good to have those in your pocket. And then just your organizational capacity. And I appreciate the fact that most of the people on this webinar are operating affordable housing societies and it's nonprofit in nature. However, ensuring that there's some capacity left over to take on this kind of project is definitely important. So if there's ways you can axe things off to create some internal capacity, it's all the better. And you have to have the depth and the drive and the desire to actually pull this off. Like I said earlier, it's a long-term commitment, and it's not for the weak of heart. So drilling a little bit deeper into the organizational capacity, the strength of the governance of the organization, really having clear lines between the governors of the organization and the staff that operate. Understanding who your partners may or could be or are, having those kinds of relationships recorded through MOUs, memorandums of understanding, partnership protocols, those kinds of things. Those are the types of things that you could be putting into place in advance of the announcement, as opposed to waiting till the announcement. It's something, it's always good to reach out to your partners and reconnect, or reach out to new partners and make some connections where there's some like-minded organizations that could work together to capitalize on this investment. Obviously, working with their First Nations, both on and off reserve, depending, I think, where you are in the country and where you are within your provinces. There are many opportunities where you can actually work very closely with First Nations to be able to achieve housing projects, both for their on-reserve communities and for the off-reserve communities. I think it's important to understand your expiration profile for your organization and what the magnitude of that is. I'm not saying it's going to be something that ends up being submitted as part of a proposal, but I think just a sheer understanding of it organizationally, I think readies you better for these types of opportunities. It just shows a really good understanding of both, you know, the risks and the challenges, also the opportunities for your organization. Always good to ensure that you know and have a good understanding of your facility condition index or your building condition assessments, so just having a good understanding of your inventory, your housing portfolio, you know, who your tenants are, who are on your application wait list, that kind of thing. Understanding where your organization actually has equity. Sometimes equity isn't the most obvious thing. It doesn't always have to be cold hard cash to be able to call it equity, but being able to understand where the equity exists and then maybe trying to understand how to access that equity. So really looking for that leveraging opportunity. Equity could be that land piece that we've got an excess piece of land within the development, and that's something I'll talk about a little bit later. So obviously we're looking at ways to regenerate and even densify some of the properties and projects. It's a way of really untying some of that locked-in equity that we just spoke about. It's a way of achieving a project where the land costs are significantly less than if you had to go out and access that land through typical markets. Always good to have a good understanding of what the operating model would be for the new development, and obviously for your existing development. That's kind of what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, but being able to understand what it would look like once you were to add a project or projects into the portfolio of your society. So now I want to talk a little bit about transformation in the sector. You know, this is kind of the thing that's been going through my mind a lot. You hear the word transformation a lot. It's the new buzzword. I think a year ago it was procurement was the buzzword. This year it seems to be transformation. I believe that transformation is really already occurring within the sector and much needed. And I think that transformation, unfortunately, in some ways, is a shift from that social rent geared to income type of subsidized housing units over to the affordable type of housing units, where rents are not based on household incomes, but they are flat rent on the door. So the reason I mention this is because a lot of organizations and governors and stakeholders are not prepared to make that jump, and most indications are that a lot of this investment that's going into new development will be geared towards this type of housing development. Notwithstanding, like what Don had mentioned, there are clear possibilities about investment or continued investment in the operating subsidies for particular housing groups. It's been mentioned just the co-ops, but like Don said as well, we're hoping that it gets extended to the nonprofit sector as well. So again, that switch from rent geared to income over to lower end of market. And also a shift in mixed use, seeing more and more successful developments where there's commercial type of tenants on possibly the ground floor that's paying market rents, and that's actually cross-subsidizing the units above. the residential units typically above, and that's allowing those kinds of projects to proceed that would not have been able to from a financial feasibility perspective in the past. And a real shift between that grant versus operating subsidy. Governments have really moved towards this one-time cash grant into the project to buy down really what ends up being the mortgage on the building, so that the rents can support the operating costs, including the mortgage commitments. So again, a big shift from what we're all very used to, where operating subsidy came in on a monthly basis, and it was the difference between the cost of the unit, including the mortgage and debt, and what the tenant was able to contribute towards that expense. So this is a very, very different way of doing business, and again, it really forces us to shift from that RGI to that lower end of market mentality. And again, transformation is about the social enterprise versus the real charitable nonprofit way of doing business and way of thinking. A lot of effort and a lot of concentration being put on nonprofits and charitable organizations to look at ways of being more diversified with their revenue sources. I'm not going to speak to how this could deal with or how it could impact your status with the CRA. We're hoping that there's some significant change by the Trudeau government to relax some of those requirements and to allow this social enterprise type of movement to actually occur without placing your organization offside with any regulators. So what are the development opportunities? Always partnerships. Everybody talks about them. I know they're difficult. I think that they are achievable. I know they are achievable. And I think that the real way forward will be some traditional types of partnerships. So those partnerships where organizations are like-minded, have similar types of clients, tenants. And then the non-traditional, I really see that commercial type of tenant being a big contributor to allowing us to continue to operate affordable housing. So, seeing somebody like Starbucks or Tim Hortons or maybe a pharmacy or a doctor's office consume that commercial space, and thereby helping to cross-subsidize the building. So again, densification, regeneration, always looking sure that your sites are as densified as they possibly can be within the community and from an area of acceptance by the community and by the organization. And then that commercial partners piece I just mentioned around the non-traditional partnerships. So what does the project look like, and what are some of the pieces that we really need organizations to get their head around so that you're ready to respond to a call or calls? The very, very first thing we always see as a requirement from government agencies is a verification of that need and demand. So really putting some time and effort and sometimes contracting out this service to do the research to verify exactly that the need and the demand for the type of housing project that you're proposing is completely supported. Always exploring those land options, like I said earlier. Is it densification? Is it partnerships? What kind of land options are available to your organization? Everybody loves pretty pictures. The high-level design, if there's a way to channel some resources into high-level design once you've come up with that, the typology of your project, the types of units, and then the land options, if you can come up with even some massing or elevations to show what the project may look like in a community, it goes a long way. Another big piece of getting ready for any kind of proposal call is the development of the capital and the operating budgets, and this really is the development of obviously what it's going to cost, not just on a capital basis, but on an ongoing operating basis. And therefore, it's going to result in what the actual gap is that we're needing to fill because of the shift towards the grants versus ongoing operating subsidies. So build out that business plan, identify how it will be operated, who's going to be operating it, what that model really looks like, how it fits well within your organization, how it actually helps your organization to build capacity, to continue and support the sustainability of your organization. New builds have a big contribution towards sustainability of organizations, so we will flesh that out as much as we can. The feasibility analysis really is an extension of that business plan, how it all works. And at the end of the day, that's what we get to is the ask. You know, Don had a slide that the top was the ask. Well, this is the ask. What is the gap between what you can afford, what the rents can actually support, and what the difference is becomes the ask. So that's all considered pre-development types of work, and these activities are, you know, they're pretty sophisticated. They're going to take some time. They're also going to take some resources, and there are some places to actually get some resources for that. So where does that kind of money come from? If you can untap your locked-in equity, if you can convince funders to utilize possibly operating surpluses, if you're fortunate to have that, those are ways to provide some support to that those pre-development activities. Real estate foundations still in this country are providing some types of grants that could be leveraged for this pre-development type of work. CMHC is still in the game. I know some of you may be shocked when I say that, but there are still grants and loans that are both forgivable and non-forgivable, and some of them are actually interest-bearing, and some are actually even interest-free, and they take the form of both seed funding and PDF or proposal development funding. Once this is all over, I believe Kristen will be sending an electronic version of this presentation, which will include those two blue underlined hyperlinks. You can just click those and it goes straight over to CMHC's program overviews. And they're very well written, easy to understand, and helps you understand exactly what you could do to access those funds. And most provincial ministries where there is a housing ministry, BC especially, have also those kinds of PDF funding opportunities that go a long way to supporting those pre-development costs. So the value proposition, another interesting term, you know, it's all about pick me, pick me. You want to be at the top of the pile. You don't want to be in the middle. You don't want to be in the bottom. So you really need to understand how to make sure your project sticks out and how it's the one that ends up receiving the kind of support that it needs. Obviously, the higher your equity position, your society's equity position is in that project, the lower the ask. That's an easy project for government to approve. Support from other agencies, from other areas, both traditional and non-traditional, goes a long way. Ministries of housing love to see when health is involved or some other ministry is also engaged in that project's success. And a lot of times those other supportive ministries actually are helping with the business feasibility of that project. Obviously, they want strategic partnerships, and if you are able to bring that to the table, that goes a long, long way. Governments love to show that there's partnerships that have been leveraged to pull off these projects. I'm unsure if Mr. Trudeau, our Prime Minister, is going to be using Harper words like shovel ready, but timing is always important. And I'm not, getting your project totally shovel ready is a great place to be. But if you can actually get that pre-development work done that we described in the last slide, that goes a long, long way, because that project has, really surpassed or passed that hurdle, and you can actually get to the place of getting that project in the ground. If there's a social enterprise angle, if this project is supporting a social enterprise within your organization or other organizations, I think that's a way to have your project stick out and be unique. Obviously, that pre-work is completed. It puts your project at a higher position in the ranking. And so you've got all those components that we talked about on the last slide. So that type of non-traditional business strategy, that mixed use we talked about, that commercial tenant possibly that's paying market rent, is a nice way to make your project stick out and be unique. Mixed income, where you've got varying levels of rental rates within a project that support family incomes or household incomes at differing degrees. So you may have lower rents and a range going up to what we call lower end of market that could be 5 or 10% below actual market. A lot of times there's an actual call for projects. Sometimes there's a direct submission, which is also called a rolling proposal call. It's very common in BC that there's nothing stopping an organization from submitting a proposal. You don't have to wait for a proposal call. Need to get municipal support as much as possible. Municipal governments can be great advocates. They sometimes have access to ministers and politicians that we don't as organizations, so if they can advocate for your project. Municipalities have the power and control and authority to waive property taxes. It's a huge hit to your operating model. If you can have property taxes waived, it just makes that, it has such a direct impact to the rent that your tenants pay. It sets your project apart in a big, big way. Municipalities should be coming to the table with the waiving of development cost charges and community amenity contribution fees, things like that. Not all municipalities have those, but we're looking for municipalities that'll step up and waive every possible fee that you could encounter that is just going to be a further financial burden to your project. Sometimes they have land, sometimes they even have grants towards housing projects. And they can accelerate processes. Some municipalities actually have accelerated processes specifically for affordable housing projects. They can certainly speed up rezoning processes and development permits and building permit processes. And then political support. Everybody needs to be at some table with some politician at some level to make sure that it's fresh in their mind what your project is. So what's your elevator pitch? You've got 30 seconds to really communicate it. You really need to ensure that the people that you're talking to your project about know it's about people, it's about families. You need to know who's going to be living in that unit, the number of those singles, families, elders, seniors, whatever it could be. You really need to articulate that quickly. What the total ask is, what the total capital budget is, what the operating budget is, what those average rents are. Everybody seems to be very aware of what average rents are in our communities, and if you can demonstrate where your rents are in the continuum and that they're lower, it's very powerful. Again, number of families that are housed, it's just numbers, really mean a lot. Number of jobs created, not just during the capital process, but also or not just during the construction process, but also during the operating phase. The leveraging ratios, where you demonstrate to government how much monies you've received or invested from other partners, from your own organization, all those things that fit into the business plan and how you've then leveraged that. Your 2-to-1 or 5-to-1, whatever those ratios are, it's very powerful messaging. That social enterprise, lower end of market, where there's some subsidization from within your organization through a social enterprise towards supporting lower end of market rent rates. Powerful message as well. And then those impacts of the contributions. We'd like to show politicians, both municipal and provincial, the impact of their investment, what it means to the family or the single or the person that's living in that unit, the contribution that that grant makes towards their rent. And then talk about how it has an impact on the sustainability of your organization. Talk about how important it is that your organization continue to provide the service that it does to the community, and that these kinds of projects go a long way to supporting your organization's future. So what's your 3-step plan to succeed? Really get your entire organization as ready as you can. Board, staff, systems, infrastructure, consultants, all those things. Even if it's just reaching out and making everybody aware. Get your project ready, go through that list, understand your need, demand, understand where your equity could be coming from, understand who your partners could be, try to formalize those arrangements as much as possible, and then get that value proposition and that promotion plan in place. Understand really quick numbers, telling the story about the people and getting the message out. So that's the completion of my presentation. I think I'll pass it back to Kristen now, and then I think Kristen's going to help us navigate through some questions.
Great, thank you very much, Kevin, for that great presentation, and to Don as well. As we said, we will open the floor now to Q&A, and everyone has a control panel, and they can type into their control panel, and we will read your questions aloud. And if you want to let us know if the question is either for Don or Kevin, that's very helpful as well. Before we open the floor, though, we're going to have Louise step in and just provide a bit of commentary and to start the question period off for us.
Thank you, Kristen, and thank you, Kevin and Don. I'd just like to make an observation, both at CHRA's Aboriginal Caucus Day 2015 and again today. I think it's increasingly evident that the nonprofit housing community is ahead of government, banking and industry, and even the philanthropic sector in embracing innovation and transformation. And I think the expertise and wisdom of the two people that we have presenting today is a perfect illustration of that. And I fervently hope that we can have the kind of policies at all levels and in all sectors that will support this innovation and transformation. Now, I'm going to just kick off with the first question, and my question is to Don and to Kevin, and it focuses on the vulnerability of existing RGI units, rent geared to income units. So here's the question. What advice would you give the federal government as the best way to support and or to transition those RGI units and families? Do you want me to repeat it?
Oh, I got it. It's a question that's all the time.
Okay, well, I'll just repeat it quickly again. What advice would you give the federal government as the best way to support and or to transition those RGI units and families? Don?
Well, my response to that would be that for federal re-engagement to deal with the existing RGI units, specifically in the Indigenous community, they really have to look at the clients that are being serviced. And for the majority of those providers that I'm aware of, it's deep core. So to handle deep core, and you noticed in Kevin's presentation, he's correct in saying that the sector seems to be going to the low end of market for dealing with new developments. However, when we look at specifically at the Indigenous community, we're looking at a definite requirement in the housing continuum to deal with the very deep core client group. And the majority of the units that we have in our portfolio now are occupied by that group. So my recommendation to the federal government for reinvestment is definitely not to extend subsidy agreements, because those agreements right now are so restrictive that they don't allow individual organizations or societies to operate business in a good way, because they're so bound to restrictions that were involved in each of the individual programs. But they should really look at what it costs to get down to deep core from market. Look at something that's similar to a rent subsidy, and then calculate it based on the depth of need that the organization is servicing. So if in fact you wanted to use something like an RGI calculation of 25%, 35%, 45%, the amount of the individual subsidy for the unit that you're using that subsidy for, or for the client group that you're using that subsidy for, can easily be calculated. And I think it should be directed specifically straight to the housing provider, even if it's on a biannual, quarterly, in advance payment directly from the federal government, so that those ongoing deep core operations can continue to exist. Now, having said that, I firmly believe that every one of these organizations, if they qualify for that program, are still going to have to look at business transformation and business transition to allow them to develop additional units to provide more assistance to their existing client groups.
That's a good. That's a good two-pronged answer there, Don. How about you, Kevin?
Yeah, Don certainly mentioned the kinds of things that I would be advocating for. I think the first thing that comes to my mind is not dissimilar to Don's, but operating subsidies should continue beyond expiration. And interestingly enough, they drop considerably because of the expiration. The mortgages are extinguished. So there's a way to continue this subsidization towards those people that are in the deepest core need, without having a major impact on the federal budget whatsoever. The money's already been allocated. It's been allocated on an annual basis. They just don't, what they need to do is just not reduce it to zero once those mortgage payments or those mortgage commitments are made. I mean, I think the other thing is government really needs to get out of the way of the sector and allow the sector to be creative and nimble, and like Don said, that really in support of those social types of enterprises that we could be developing within our own organizations to help cross-subsidize. consolidation of operating agreements or umbrella agreements, things like that, ways to allow societies to be creative and strategic about the way they invest in their portfolios and the way that they support the tenants. BC has made huge strides in that area through their asset transfer program, and it's really an admission by the BC government that it's the nonprofit sector can do the best by for the tenants that are in need of the support that we're speaking to. But at the end of the day, when it's a rent geared to income type of subsidization program, it's only government that can sign those blank checks. It's no other organization that can really address that unknown need because it changes frequently with income levels.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We're getting some questions about posting the presentations and people interested in sharing this with their boards, so that's great to see. And just to reiterate that CHRA will put both the PowerPoint presentations and an audio recording of today's presentation up on the CHRA website, and that will be up by early next week. So please do check back in and those presentations will be made available. So we have another question rolling in for you both, and I'll read it out to you here. And it is, are you aware of any evidence that the federal government will be wanting to move financing for housing through partnerships with provincial governments? I know the BC government is very interested in getting the feds to match their recent announcement of investing $355 million into affordable housing. And if not, what kind of programs might we consider seeing the feds go it alone on?
Yeah, I mean, all indications in BC is that, BC is looking for the Fed to match the dollars, that's for sure. I think that was the intent of the BC government, was to almost beat the federal government to the punch. But I haven't heard anything specific about the financing piece. I think that was the first part of the question, Kristen. I know there's a lot of work being done by some other organizations around a housing sector bank that would be in response to the sector specifically, that they focused only on affordable housing, so they could provide some better types of financing tools that could be made available across the country.
From an Ontario perspective, I wish that we had a provincial government that was indicating they had dollars that they wanted the federal government to match, but I think in Ontario they're waiting a little bit more to hear what the federal budget includes. I don't think our budget next Thursday is going to include any specific capital component. Given that the federal government, or the former federal government, through the Investment in Affordable Housing Program, has basically developed a streamline or a line to get capital into the system through the provinces, I think that may continue to happen. I think that may be a component of what they want to do with provincial contribution as well. But from what we've been reading in the pre-budget consultations, the Minister of Finance has been more than willing to go to large municipal areas such as Vancouver, Toronto, and talk with mayors of those individual municipalities about providing capital infrastructure funding for housing directly to those communities. So I think what we may see in the federal budget might be a 2- or 3-prong approach on how they want to get infrastructure money into the system. Hopefully, they won't wait until they have all the discussions about developing their 10-year plan. Hopefully that 3-prong approach has 3 prongs for an immediate solution and an immediate inclusion for economic development, and then hopefully they will develop a plan that will bring in all of the sectoral organizations to have a good discussion about a long-term commitment and a housing strategy for Canada.
Great, thank you. We have Kevin and Don for a few more minutes, so if there are any more questions, I please encourage you to type them in and we'll get to them. We have a question coming in, Kevin, that was sent in response to your presentation. It's asking specifically about the BC government and inquiring that it seems like they want to be using an RFP process for their new program, and what your thoughts are on this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've heard a couple different mixed messages about that. I've heard that it could be an RFP process. I've also heard that there's a potential for that, what they call in BC a rolling proposal call, where societies, organizations are encouraged to bring proposals forward. I recommend to clients of McCullough Development Services and societies that we work with on a daily basis to not wait for those proposal calls to be submitted, and to submit your projects as they're available. It doesn't prevent you from then also responding to the RFP, but I've also heard that maybe there's going to be some direction around an Aboriginal specific type of program. We're certainly hopeful of that. It's something that the Fed and the province has done before in the past, and we look forward to an Aboriginal specific funding envelope.
Great, thanks.
I wanted to ask another question. Maybe you could start with Don. Well, and I'd like if we could look a bit more at financing. As we know, for new projects and even for renovation of existing stock, financing will be needed for at least for a portion of the cost. And because the capital will not, and other in-kind and everything else you assemble will typically not be enough to fund it. So I wanted to get any reflections that you have on some best, what would be some of the best practice or the best ways that governments or other entities could support that need for financing.
Well, there's a couple of models that they're using in Canada right now. I mean, there's the First Nation Housing Trust, which is basically a backstop. It's an insurance backstop to borrow money to do housing development on First Nations. The Housing Partnership Canada was proposing a little different type of a central capitalization bank where individual nonprofit housing providers could basically invest their long-term capital savings plans, for their whole corporation and borrow against their own with some kind of a federal contribution that could be leveraged in the open market to allow low interest rates for specifically affordable housing programs. What we've found in the past is that even though you have infrastructure banks like they're talking about for the federal government, I mean, there's one in Ontario, but they're pretty much geared to infrastructure that's more in the roads and transportation area because the ability to repay it's based on your tax base. When you're talking about safe and affordable housing with reduced revenue opportunities, the risk becomes a little bit higher for the lender, and so every time you go to these infrastructure banks, they look at different kinds of infrastructure differently, and housing is definitely the one that you can't get a very high ratio against the capital that you're contributing. So given that, if they have an infrastructure bank, and when we're talking about capital investment in infrastructure in affordable housing, I think first of all, for federal provincial dollars, even they have to look at existing programs to ensure that they're capitalizing enough so that there isn't a great requirement to obtain this kind of leverage financing on individual projects. I mean, we have to basically start looking at things a little bit different. Why invest $150,000 a unit in a project that it's economic longevity and it's even environmental capacity to last for 35 or 40 years isn't there? We got to look at maybe increasing that by 25 or 30%, decreasing our requirement to go out and borrow money, and let's do it right the first time.
Kevin?
Yeah, Louise, I would add that within BC, I mean, I think BC really has it figured out with respect to new build. I mean, there's no other province in the country, and when I think of even internationally, that has knocked this out of the park as well as BC has. They have preferential, guaranteed by the BC government financing for both construction and takeout financing. Those mortgages are backed by, like I said, the province of BC, but they're actually provided by Schedule A banks and life insurance companies. So it's really not leaning heavily on the taxpayer whatsoever. And obviously the rate of default for an affordable housing provider is close to zero as you can get. So banks love to bid on this business, and we're getting interest rates that are just so incredibly low. I mean, they're generationally low for ourselves, in our own personal situations and also for affordable housing. We just signed a 10-year mortgage renewal for 2.51%. Those rates have just never been heard of before. So the timing is really, really important that we jump on this bandwagon. People are saying that rates are going to continue to decline, not like they have a lot of room to do that. The rates really don't have much other direction but to eventually go up. This is the time to really capitalize. But I find it always interesting when people talk about trying to have nonprofits, seek out alternate forms of financing. It implies that we have surpluses to be able to actually debt service, and we don't. So I'm always curious as to how organizations can really pull that off, because you're either going to have to pull out some portion of your operating income to allocate towards that debt, and how does that actually work when you're working on a nonprofit basis, when a funder has a locked-in agreement and a covenant on all of the uses and where the proceeds go on those affordable housing units.
Thank you. Just a couple of clarifications. First of all, Don, when you mentioned right out of the starting blocks about the First Nation Housing Trust, are you talking about the First Nation Market Housing Fund?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. And of course, as you say, it's only available on First Nations. Again, it's meant as a backstop. It's not actually loaning, as you were very clear on, I'm sure, not loaning money out of the $300 million plus fund, but actually doing a backstop and having a set of approved perhaps approved banks and other financial institutions to actually do the lending. But anyway, as far as you're concerned, Kevin, how much advocacy do you think, do you happen to have? Maybe you're not comfortable answering this. This whole idea of the BC model, is there good advocacy out there to help the federal government see that this might be a model that could work more broadly?
Well, I think the short answer is yes. I mean, it's no secret how BC does it. It's not even a complex process or a sophisticated kind of model. I mean, you can go onto their website and read about exactly how they do it right now, but to say that is there advocacy on a federal level that would boil down to the provincial level, there are things called the FPT table, which is the federal province, federal provincial territorial table, and they actually speak obviously like this. So it's very widely understood across the country, I would assume, but I haven't really heard of any other provinces taking a look at it to provide that solution for their constituents in their provinces. It's surprising that it hasn't actually been done in other provinces.
Okay. And Dawn, you and I had talked from time to time about mortgage insurance, if and when people do need to borrow some capital for their project, and you had some thoughts on that?
Well, basically, I mean, there is a requirement if you're trying to use leverage to develop additional inventory for your portfolio. In a lot of these cases where you're trying to leverage an asset that you currently have, a lot of the financial institutions want you to have insurance. And I think with CMHC sort of retreating from the housing game, banks are going to CMHC and they're just offering you the rates that they offer to the general developers. So I think it would be really easy for CMHC just to say, if it's an affordable housing development, to give the private sector lenders confidence. It's just that we will insure it at no cost to the affordable housing provider.
Okay, thank you.
And a last question here, going back to your points that you were both speaking about on financing. We have someone asking if you have any feedback on a way to get lenders on board or credit unions.
Well, I think if you had a central operation that you could say, here's an equity position from the sector. Here is a federal government that's willing to insure the loans, as well as a federal government that's going to throw in some money to allow for additional leverage. I think you're going to find, as Kevin said, that right now, if you have that type of utility type organization that goes on, that you're going to have banks crawling all over it. I mean, getting them involved in something like that, I think, is easy. To have a bank look at an individual nonprofit and say, yeah, I'm prepared to finance it up to X% of its value or to, a cap rate of Y, they still feel a high risk possibility, although, we know that affordable housing providers very seldom don't pay their mortgages, but their downside is, what if they ever had to call the mortgage? So I think what we have to have is that that insurance backing, that leverage opportunity, and a professional organization that's administering it.
Yeah, I would say in the province of BC, Louise, that Vancity has created a very interesting space, or they've gotten into this space, and I would say reasonably aggressively and quite successfully for them. Other than that, most banks just don't get this business, and because we're typically funded by government and we're typically financed through government, they've never really had to get to know this business. They would try to compare us to a for-profit apartment builder, and obviously the numbers don't work. We're going in there showing our rents, our rental summaries, and they're looking at the rates going, well, how is this ever going to work? So I think it would take a bank or a financial institution, a credit union that has that, what Vancity calls that triple bottom line kind of perspective, that they want to make wise and investments in the community to support community. But to get a conventional bank like Scotia or TD or Royal or anything to come into this space without some real significant government backing, I don't think they'd be interested in doing it. And at the current rates, they can't even compete with what we're able to secure through BC Housing's guaranteed financing program.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was fantastic. We have a last question here for both presenters, and it's thinking of rural and northern areas and the populations there, and any suggestions or thought in financing affordable housing in these regions, as capital grants tend to be smaller in these areas and it's harder to do effective builds.
Yeah, we have quite a bit of experience, and Kevin is now involved in a lot more rural properties as well. What we're looking at in those communities, again, is there's going to be a capital component requirement to increase the number of units in the north and in rural communities. I think we have to really look at who we're providing our assistance to in those communities, and looking at the built form that we're using. The old single-family electrically heated unit on an acre with water, with a drilled well and a septic system, I don't think are in the best interest of the provider or the client group. So I think this perspective that we look at when it comes to the three-pronged approach for infrastructure has to be looked at through that lens as well.
Yeah, Don's right. I mean, there's no real magic bullet for that type of solution in these communities. I mean, you've got a lot of things working against the financial model. The rents, of course, are based on income. If it's the typical kind of RGI, which a lot of the rural and native housing programs obviously are. The problem is your construction costs in those communities are higher. Your renovation costs, your repair costs, all those things are higher. I mean, we have a number of rural and native housing units where just the actual cost of the gas exceeds the rent tenfold. So, like the financial sustainability of those buildings without a significant support from some level of government, it's just not realistic. I mean, it really is going to take a different view and a different perspective to allow those, especially like Don said, single-family dwellings to continue to provide affordable housing to those persons and families. But from a perspective of pure business sustainability, they're not sustainable.
Great. Well, fantastic. Thank you very much. Those are our questions for today. So I would like to thank both Don and Kevin from everyone here at CHRA for your time in putting together these incredible presentations today. Thank you very much. And to all of you participating, please do visit the CHRA website for more information on Aboriginal Caucus Day and CHRA Congress 2016, which is taking place April 12th to 15th in beautiful downtown Montreal. You can visit us at www.chra-achru.ca. Thank you to everyone for participating today, and take care and bye for now.